It's a conflict in which taboos and limitations have been broken, one after another. Neighbourhoods have been starved, millions driven overseas, aid convoys bombed, and the beheading or mistreatment of prisoners elevated into public spectacle. History has recorded quite a few brutal civil wars, but this one has reached a particularly grim pitch of murderous intensity. It pits against one another an array of forces, on the far end of which are President Assad and those around him who believe they will be physically eliminated if they lose, and a jihadist enemy who think that they're divinely ordained in their slaughter.
Well, it's become much more brutal than the savage civil war in Bosnia, which I saw at first hand. It became brutal quite quickly in 2012, but the arrival of ISIS and the way ISIS went about fighting and imposing their rule, and particularly treating their captives, whichever captives they took, including Syrian government soldiers, added an extra dimension of brutality, which has been truly shocking.
Some of Syria's largest cities have been pounded to the point where the ruins stretch for miles, catalogued by these Russian journalists. More than half of the country's population has fled its homes. While mediators have told the warring parties they cannot win, they have not, despite all of this, reached a point where exhaustion leads them to abandon war.
If you look at other civil wars around the world and how they've ended, generally speaking, if they're going to end by negotiation, they end when you reach something the academics call a mutually hurting stalemate. That doesn't just mean a stalemate. When I went to Libya as the Prime Minister's Special Envoy, I thought, oh, we've got a stalemate. But we didn't have a mutually hurting stalemate. Both sides could still advance a bit, take a bit more territory, gain a bit more money. It's when both sides realise they're not going to win militarily and that people are just suffering unnecessarily. That's when you get to the stage where you can try and end a war.
So will the Syrian war simply carry on until one or both sides have fought themselves to exhaustion? Well, it's more complicated than that, because that has already happened in a way with President Assad's forces, plagued by desertion and barely capable on their own of offensive action. And of course, they've had thousands of fighters join them from Hezbollah, from Iraq, from Iran, and indeed from Russia. And that's kept them fighting, highlighting the key role now of outside intervention. With a dozen air forces operating over the country and arms poured in for years, only China among the UN's Big Five has not become directly involved. And that, along with Iran, Saudi and Turkish policies, has stymied the search for any international solution.
Huge divisions between the US, Russia, the Saudis and Iran, and until the future of Assad is resolved and the troops on the ground issue is resolved, you're going to have continued casualties. There's 75,000 people at risk right now. The humanitarian convoys are not getting through. You have the Syrians bombing convoys, the US bombing Syrians. It's an ultimate disaster.
But few outside powers have the appetite for a completely open-ended intervention, and even Russia and Iran have suggested limits on their willingness to support the Assad regime. Eventually, that could weigh on the warring parties.
I hope it ends soon, but I fear it may take some time. I think, as in most other conflicts in the past, there will at some stage be a mutually hurting stalemate. The rebels will do better militarily, Assad will be on the back foot, the Russians will have other reasons that they want to get out of Syria while protecting their interests. At that stage, I think you could begin serious negotiations, but I don't believe the conflict will end, nor do I believe our fight against ISIS will end until Assad is gone.
So how long could the Syrian war, now in its 6th year, go on? Well, the Bosnian conflict was brought to an end by foreign intervention on one side with the aim of coercing a halt to the whole business. Perhaps the closest example we can see to Syria is the war in Lebanon, where many of the same groups and the same outsiders were involved, and which in one form or another continued for 15 years.